really nice run.
Well, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with Alabama and Brandon Miller here in the coming days. He is scheduled to play tonight. I cannot imagine that going well for the Tide if he does that. I mean, on the court it might, but I can't imagine that.
Well, I saw where a PD or maybe it was even a district attorney mentioned that they can't charge him with a crime. Yeah, he's involved, and I'm not saying that there shouldn't be something here that Nate Oates and Alabama have to look at because of the story itself led to somebody being murdered. And we discussed this at length yesterday, and Oates, of course, and I said it, you watched by the end of the evening, and sure enough, he came back with a retraction or tried to get back into, I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to be whatever. But he's not going to be charged with anything. This is going to be interesting how Alabama, they're playing at South Carolina tonight, right? And they are a half game up on A&M. So you think this is a bad – you think he should play? Because I don't – okay.
No, I think – look, and I don't know, when the legal – they said they can't charge him with anything. But I said this on the show yesterday. 99% of the suspensions that happen, like you missing a game or punishments happen because of things that aren't against the law. They're just against the rules. Or they're because you made a bad decision, because you did something that has hurt the team in some way, shape, or form. And almost none of those, statistically outside of one other incident that we can think about, ended up in a murder. So Alabama needs to gain some perspective here. What if he had skipped practice that day to do it? He'd be suspended then, right? Well, let's grab some perspective. And I'm not saying you have to suspend him for all time, but they are not going, they're not going to have him past this year anyway. He's one of the best freshman players in the country.
Right.
So he is going to be gone. So I get that in their heads, they're like, okay, well, he's not charged with anything. It was an unfortunate circumstance. He wasn't part of the plotting of this. Nothing's going to happen. But something has to happen for a terrible decision that led to someone's murder.
Yeah, and I said they have A&M at the end of the regular season. They have 3 games left, including South Carolina's 4 games left. They have A&M a week from Saturday, March the 4th, to close out their SEC schedule. Craig, you think that Miller should play right now, or should he at least be suspended until even more information, if anything, comes forward?
I really don't know. I mean, I can appreciate to some small extent Nate Oates trying to clarify his comments, but I know he was only doing that because they came across so poorly the first time when he said probably what he really meant to say to begin with. It's not like he really said anything all that mind-blowing the second time around that you were like, oh, okay, I totally get it. We were all wrong in judging the way that you said that. No, I mean, felt the exact same way after he said his apology, but, at least they attempted to try and clean that mess up, but I don't think it worked very well. Regardless, they're Alabama, and I don't really think they care, to be perfectly honest with you. They have a really good basketball team. I think if the basketball team wasn't very good, then you'd probably hear more Alabama supporters say otherwise. But the fact that they're sitting there looking at, the chance to go roll Tide in the NCAA tournament, I think that trumps any of the actual human stuff, to be perfectly honest. I do. And I don't think that's the case for every Alabama fan, but I've seen enough of, to gauge on social media, just some of the comments I've seen, and I understand some of that's troll accounts and all of that, so I'm not saying, here's this broad brush I'm going to paint all of Alabama's fandom with, but I have seen plenty of, Charlie Roll Tide and, those people that are – well, what if it was your son? Wouldn't you want him to get a chance? It's yeah, what if you were the parent of the daughter who's dead? I mean, so we want to play that what about game. Let's play the what about game, because one person's dead, the other person you're arguing shouldn't be suspended for, giving the gun to somebody that they eventually gave to somebody that used it in a murder to kill this young mother. So you want to play whataboutism, let's play whataboutism, but, they've got a big crowd online, so they'll shout you down, and it just turns into the typical back and forth of
right.
You suck, no, you suck. And so there's not there's any really meaningful conversations going to come out. But I do appreciate the Alabama fans that actually have a human being perspective that can look at it and say yeah, this is screwed up and maybe we should do something. But what that answer is, I don't know. If you suspended him for a game, is that going to be enough for the crowd? Are you spending 5 games? Is that going to be enough for the online mob? Because I don't believe that you always just bow down to those people either. But I do think that this just the way it was handled initially of that original statement about like basically he did nothing wrong. He gave a gun that eventually was used in a murder. Now, whether it was the person's gun he was giving it to, like I think you look at the details of it, nobody's getting calls that late at night to get a gun for somebody that's not like kind of probably fishy that makes you go, huh, should I do, and I get that there's probably an excuse that can be made in every corner of this story of, well, they're young or what, like so it doesn't really matter what I think ultimately. I've tried to kind of think my way through it from all sides, and I just think it's an ugly story.
Yeah,
and
it's unfortunate. It is.
It sucks that it's turned into mudslinging, and it sucks that people are acting as though there was nothing wrong with that statement, and I don't know
how many people were acting, if there were, on the statement, but he came back. The blowback was coming. You could see it. You're going to build it, and social media leads a lot to that as well. TJ Scott on the chat room. All right, the guy's a horrible person, but nobody seems to care that there are a lot of horrible people in sports. If he is not charged, what can they do? By the way, I care that our society does not care. So that's from TJ Scott.
Well, here's what they can do.
I don't think he's a horrible person either. I don't think anybody's saying that. I think he made a really dumb decision that whether he's a horrible person or not, like that's a decision that led to somebody's murder, and there has to be some level of accountability for that. And the fact that he may not be smart enough, like as far as just, where he is in life and maturity-wise, to understand how grave of a mistake that was because he doesn't get punished for it, that's not a good thing for him moving forward, or Alabama basketball players, or really anybody else that's watching the story and going like, well, he didn't do anything wrong. Like, that's why I think there should be some level of accountability, even if it's just Nate Oates going like, he really screwed up. It was a really dumb decision, and at least we feel like there's a talking to going on. But instead, the way it came across was like, y'all are overreacting. He didn't do anything. He had nothing to do with it. And it's like, no, there's a lesson that needs to be learned here.
Exactly. So really, the only thing, and look, I asked around, the only thing that seems to be keeping him from an accessory after the fact in this thing is it wasn't his gun. It was Darius Miles' gun.
Exactly.
He brought somebody's property to them. That person then transferred that property to someone else who then used it in a murder, which Brandon Miller was there for. Like, it didn't happen over a couple of days. It wasn't
it didn't stop there. Yeah, exactly.
So it wasn't like Darius Miles called up Brandon Miller and said, hey, man, can you bring me my gun? And then a week later it happened. He brought him his gun. Darius Miles handed it to the other guy, and the other guy committed the murder right then. So when you're Brandon Miller, the lesson you need to learn is ask one question. Hey, you okay? Should we talk this out a second? Why do you need your gun at night, randomly, just now? And what are you walking into? So if you are truly a victim of circumstance for Brandon Miller, you got to learn where you trace back how you found up in that situation. And you wound up in that situation because you just did something and didn't. Say it was a total mistake. He's got to be suspended for it because of the consequences of what happened.
We're not there. We haven't spoken to anybody there. We don't really know exactly what is the right answer, but it's worth the debate. That's for sure. And both of you are right in everything that you've said. Like, for example, criminality may not be determined until an investigation is complete. That could take maybe weeks or months. Liability will prove to be another thing. From Kealani, he's not an employee, so it's hard to suspend on something not explicitly against their rules if law enforcement isn't charging him. Different if he's actually employed, like, for example, Chris Beard at Texas. So appreciate the feedback from you on the chat room and also much, much more.
And to be very clear, and I think Kealani, I think that if you're Nate Oates, you can probably still suspend the guy. It's almost like the shield thing in the NFL of like, you didn't get arrested and charged with something necessarily, but you gave a black eye to the shield, quote unquote, and so we're going to suspend you for a couple of games. They could go that route, and I think that would be all right ultimately. And to be very clear, like, I don't think anybody at this table is like, he's a terrible person, screw him, he needs to go to jail. I'm not even calling him for necessarily to go to jail. We're just asking him, like, can he get suspended for like a game? Can we have some perspective on what actually occurred and what the end result of these actions were? I'm not asking for murder charges here. I'm not even asking for I'm not asking for anything. I think other than just some actual human being perspective. A young mother lost her life, and we're worried about the guy getting, like the comments are like, oh no, he's fine. It's bizarre, man, and it's very numb. And I understand that's just sort of where we are, but it's just kind of frightening that we're that numb that like his ability to play in the rest of the conference games is trumping.
Would they have suspended him if he was a
decision.
13th player off the bench? Would it matter?
I don't know. I mean,
from Carl Dahlquist.